In the late 80s, Florida's cocaine imports were among the highest in the nation. Regional territories were enforced with intimidation and murder. One dealer bowed to no one, not even law enforcement. Desperate to stop the violence, authorities turned to the FBI for help.
A suspected drug dealer would stop at nothing to keep local and federal authorities from building a case against him. When his organization started targeting the government itself, federal agencies went on high alert. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. He was a desperate man, driven to desperate measures. Bringing him down would take the combined efforts of the DEA, the ATF, and the FBI.
Fort Myers Beach, Florida, July 18th, 1987. It was a Saturday night in a Gulf Coast beach town with a thriving nightlife and a booming drug trade. Away from the tourists, many local residents spent the weekend at private parties. For some, that included cocaine. At one party, several men waited for their friend to return with more drugs. He'd been gone for about a half an hour when they heard what sounded like gunshots at around 10 p.m. The owner of the car, whose vehicle was used for the drug run, saw that it was now parked out front. Inside, he found his friend shot to death. The Lee County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. A forensic technician found only one identifiable fingerprint on the car. It belonged to the vehicle's owner. Lying close to the driver's door were 7 empty .22 caliber shell casings. Investigators determined the victim had been shot at close range. An autopsy would reveal 8 bullet wounds in his upper body and traces of cocaine in his bloodstream. The owner of the car said the dead man was his friend, 29-year-old Craig Karen. Reluctantly, he told homicide detectives that the victim had left earlier to buy cocaine. The victim's girlfriend suggested police should question her boyfriend's cocaine dealer.
Has he been bound before? Kind of stuff is it
He owed the dealer money for drugs. The dealer had a reputation for violence. Lee County homicide detective Tom Continos learned the dealer's name was Jeff Saganek.
Jeff is a young kid from Fort Myers Beach who had established himself as what I thought to be a mid-level drug dealer on the beach. Through talking to Craig's associates, I learned that Craig owed Jeff a large amount of money. And the reputation was that you better pay your bills with Jeff or he's going to send someone to collect it.
The next day, an unexpected visitor appeared at the Lee County Sheriff's Department. It was the alleged cocaine dealer himself, 23-year-old Jeff Saganek. He asked to see the detective investigating the previous night's killing. He wanted to give a statement. The reputed dealer, with a history of arrests, heard he might be a suspect and wanted to set the record straight.
I was there with my girl.
On the night of the murder, Jeff Saganek claimed that he and his girlfriend were at a restaurant for a late dinner. He said that he had talked to the victim in the parking lot just before the couple sat down to eat. After a few minutes, the man left. The reputed dealer said he and his girlfriend were at the restaurant from about 9:45 until 11 p.m. And he had more to offer than his word. Jeff Saganek handed the detective his restaurant receipt. The waitress who served them confirmed the story.
Yeah, I'll talk to her. Maybe we'll slide by the restaurant and see
It appeared he had an airtight alibi. But to the seasoned detective, it seemed Jeff Saganek was trying too hard to cover his tracks.
I had investigated enough homicides to see all different types of suspects and how they react and the reasons why they commit murder. For this young kid to come in, as well organized as he was, with an alibi, with witnesses, with receipts, he became my #1 suspect.
On a tip, the detective questioned a member of a local rock band who was also known to deal cocaine. He admitted that the victim sometimes bought drugs from him directly, which made Jeff Saganek, allegedly the largest dealer on the beach, angry over the lost sales. At about 11:15 on the night of the murder, Jeff Saganek came to the lounge where he was playing. According to the performer, Jeff Saganek boasted that he had just had the victim wasted and that it would teach the people of Fort Myers Beach a lesson. The musician's story was one of many over the next several months that confirmed what police already suspected. But even in the underworld of Fort Myers Beach, rumors and innuendo were not evidence of murder.
Everything that I got was hearsay. No one would really give me sworn testimony that says, I saw this, or I saw that, or I know this and I know that. It was all he said, she said type of intelligence information, which is maybe okay for drug cases, but not with murder investigations. You need sworn testimony of people who actually saw something happen.
Then, in the summer of 1988, over a year after the murder, the detective finally got a break. A young woman came forward, claiming to have witnessed the killing. She had not spoken up sooner because she was addicted to drugs and was protecting her former supplier, Jeff Saganek.
Craig Karen. He had it hidden.
Now she was clean and wanted to tell detectives what she had seen on the night of July 18th, 1987.
But when he told me to go.
She was on her way to the cocaine party that evening when she witnessed the shooting. The gunman was her former boyfriend, a man who worked for Jeff Saganek. But the detective would be unable to speak to her boyfriend directly. Just a few months after the murder, her boyfriend had committed suicide.
No, I heard.
She told police that she also had direct knowledge about Jeff Saganek and his organization. The woman said Jeff and his right-hand man operated out of a local pizza parlor that Saganek owned. The dealer stored his drugs and money at several different locations and moved between them to avoid detection. Few people knew where he actually lived. Jeff Saganek had many people on his payroll, but she knew only a handful. Her former boyfriend was one of them. Hired by Jeff Saganek to do whatever the dealer needed done.
Tomorrow morning? All right. Make sure you come and see me in the morning. We'll take care
She and Jeff had also had an arrangement. In exchange for storing drugs and guns at her apartment, Jeff had paid her rent.
All right, I'll see you in the morning, okay?
Unable to corroborate her story with other testimony or physical evidence, the detective could not charge Jeff Zaganek with the murder.
I followed up on those leads, and I was not able to substantiate any of the information that she gave me at that point. So without the trigger man, without a gun, without eyewitness testimony, I couldn't get to Jeff. I couldn't get to Jeff. I had no physical evidence, no testimonial evidence that enabled me to bring charges against Jeff.
The homicide detective looked to the Lee County Narcotics Unit for help. Detectives began surveillance on Jeff Zaganek's pizza parlor, hoping to identify someone they could turn against the dealer. The place was a popular spot. It would take time for officers to discern the drug traffickers from the legitimate customers. To complicate matters, Jeff Zaganek changed his name legally to Jeff Matthews, presumably to sever ties to his past crimes.
Jeff was the type of person where he wanted to be a clean-cut businessman. Jeff even went to the point of changing his name from Jeff Zaganek to Jeff Matthews to try and help him with his reputation.
Over several weeks, investigators noted which people frequented Jeff Matthews' place without picking up any food. Investigators spotted one man who visited often. A license plate check revealed his name was Stephen Franken. Detectives speculated that Franken might be their connection to Jeff Matthews. Investigators called DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam, who was already familiar with Stephen Franken. Agents believed Franken was a low-level cocaine dealer who procured his supply from Jeff Matthews, but they had no proof. To link the two men, Agent Bolam hoped to use an informant close to Franken.
I received some information from a cooperating source that Mr. Franken was distributing cocaine out of his house on Hibiscus Street in Fort Myers Beach, and that he was distributing to quite a few people down at the Fort Myers Beach area.
Their informant, recently arrested for possession, was one of Stephen Franken's biggest customers. For his cooperation in controlled drug buys from Franken, the informant would receive probation. If the purchases were successful, agents would be able to arrest Franken, then press him for direct testimony about Jeff Matthews and his organization.
Stephen Franken was important to the investigation. He had quite a bit of knowledge as far as drug trafficking that was taking place down at Fort Myers Beach, and with Jeffrey Matthews' participation in this drug trafficking.
The informant returned with cocaine. After several more buys, DEA agents finally had what they needed to make an arrest. On August 25, 1988, agents secured a felony arrest warrant for Stephen Franken for the sale and distribution of a controlled substance. Once Franken was in custody, agents searched his house. Inside, they found prepackaged cocaine, scales, and cash. In exchange for a shorter sentence, Franken agreed to cooperate with agents. He admitted that murder suspect Jeff Matthews was his cocaine supplier and consented to say so in front of the grand jury. Franken was released on bond until then. As investigators continued to hunt for evidence in their case against Matthews, deputies in nearby Collier County, Florida, responded to a crime scene. On October 2nd, 1988, a surveyor had discovered fully clothed, skeletonized human remains in a rural dump site. It appeared the body had been there for the past several weeks. Though there was no wallet or other ID, detectives did notice a paper bracelet on the victim's wrist, similar to those used by hospitals and nightclubs. Investigators gathered dental records from local families who had recently reported their loved ones as missing. They hoped one of them would match the unknown victims. The dental records, along with the body, were sent to the medical examiner for comparison. He first determined that the victim was a white male in his 20s, killed execution style with 5 .38 caliber bullets to the head. From the body's wrist, the ME removed the paper bracelet. He confirmed it was an admission ban from a nightclub in Fort Myers Beach. Dental records from a missing 22-year-old man last seen leaving the club confirmed that the murder victim was Thomas Sellers. A Collier County Sheriff's detective visited Sellers' father to give him the bad news.
Questions in reference to that. Has he been doing any illegal activities or hanging around anybody lately that...
The father told the detective that his son had a cocaine problem and believed the young man owed his dealer, Jeff Matthews, $1,000.
So tell me, what are you looking for?
It was also rumored that his son was last seen leaving the club with a man reputed to be a hitman for the dealer. But once again, investigators were unable to find evidence to corroborate the rumors.
Aware of him. Do you have any pictures of your son?
Agents and detectives' only direct witness to Matthews' operation was Stephen Franken, a low-level dealer arrested months earlier. They hoped his grand jury testimony would be enough to arrest a cocaine supplier suspected of ordering 2 executions. On January 27, 1990, as the DEA and Lee County, Florida sheriffs continued to pursue suspected cocaine dealer and murderer Jeff Matthews, detectives received a call about another possible homicide. At around midnight, a man was unpacking boxes in his new home when he heard the sound of a car squealing towards his house. The vehicle didn't stop until it reached his backyard. Inside, the driver was dead. Lee County Detective Tom Continos was one of the first to arrive at the home in St. Carlos Park.
Initially, I was told it was a motor vehicle accident. There was a dead body in the car. And the closer I looked, the more I realized that he didn't die from a car accident. He died from a bunch of bullet holes.
A driver's license found on the victim identified the dead man as 22-year-old Stephen Franken, the primary witness scheduled to testify against drug kingpin Jeff Matthews at a grand jury hearing just 2 days away. It seemed Matthews was aware that without Franken's testimony, investigators wouldn't have enough evidence to bring an indictment against the cocaine dealer, suspected in 2 killings and now a 3rd. According to DEA Special Agent Dennis Boland,
I think the timing of the murder was because of the timing of the grand jury, the information we received as far as Jeffrey Matthews being involved in other shootings and murders at Fort Myers Beach, and that Stephen Franken had some valuable information as far as Jeffrey Matthews' drug operation.
But now the grand jury would never learn what Franken knew about Matthews. The federal witness was likely dead before he crashed. Detectives decided to search the surrounding area to determine where the shooting had taken place.
Something happened before the guy hit the house, or else he wouldn't have driven through the house. So I walked down the dirt road about several hundred yards, and I found what looked like some attempt at a roadblock.
Large and small branches covered the road, strewn by what must have been a vehicle. To the left side of the site, detectives found several .22 caliber shell casings, the same caliber as the bullets later removed from Stephen Franken's body. Footprints, as well as tire impressions from a separate vehicle, were discovered close by in the loose dirt. Technicians made plaster casts for later comparison should a vehicle or suspect be located. From their placement and Franken's wounds, officers determined that the shooter had fired at the driver's side of the car.
My immediate thoughts were that someone had constructed this roadblock to slow a car down, slow the car down enough where someone can jump out of some brushy area that's along both sides of the road and shoot the person driving that car.
The gunman must have known when Franken left work and the route he traveled home. The victim probably stopped briefly when he saw debris in the road, just long enough for the shooter to take accurate aim. Clinging to life for a few more moments, he likely accelerated down the road and into the house. Though suspected murderer and drug dealer Jeff Matthews was believed responsible, investigators were once again left with no direct evidence tying Matthews to the crime. The fact that Stephen Franken had been a federal witness enabled authorities to broaden the investigation to include the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI. Together, they needed to develop a strategy to snare Jeff Matthews and put an end to the violence. Retired Special Agent Guy Notley was part of the team.
The FBI immediately started working with the Lee County Sheriff's Office and the Drug Enforcement Administration. There was nothing done without telling the other agency involved that what was going on. The FBI did have a lot of manpower that they could put on this matter. They did have tremendous ability for the technical aspect of the investigation.
They knew Matthews was still operating in the area, but the dealer was well insulated. The only way to get to him was through his drug operation and employees. But after the informant Franken was murdered, finding someone else to cooperate would be no easy task.
What made it so difficult was that we didn't have a lot of people come forward and voluntarily supply information on Jeffrey Matthews. Most of the people knew that he was capable of committing murders, and they were intimidated by him.
Agents turned to a man behind bars whom they believed had been an insider in Matthews' organization. Serving a 10-year sentence on concealed weapons charges, the Fort Myers Beach, Florida man was reputed to be one of Matthews' former hitmen. He agreed to tell what he knew about the dealer's drug operation in exchange for a shortened sentence. Just before his arrest, the alleged hitman admitted that Matthews had ordered him to surveil Stephen Franken to learn the man's schedule. With that information, Matthews would be able to silence Franken before he could testify against him. The convict denied knowing who actually pulled the trigger, since he was behind bars before the murder took place. He did tell investigators about another unsolved homicide he claimed that Matthews had committed. He said that one night at the pizza parlor, a contractor was repairing the tiles on the kitchen floor after the restaurant closed.
That's right. Yes. With the sounds.
The hitman had brought over a new silencer for Matthews' gun.
No one's gonna hear anything. No one hear anything. that thing through the weight.
It's a heavy gun.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah, how's that? Nice target. Good.
He claimed the drug lord killed the contractor just to test the silencer. Agents hoped to get Matthews to corroborate the hitman's stories. The convict agreed to call Matthews to set up a recorded meeting. He asked Matthews to come by the prison to drop off some new music tapes.
Come down here and beat me. I'm all right.
Matthews agreed.
Hi. Hi.
Agents would be ready to record the conversation on audio and video, hoping Matthews would incriminate himself.
We received approvals from the U.S. Attorney's Office as well as the jail to install these recorders. Then after we installed everything, he never did show up. Jeffrey Matthews is very elusive, surveillance conscious. He insulated himself pretty well. Even his closest friends didn't know where he was residing at.
Matthews' last suspected victim may have known. But because he was silenced, the alleged murderer remained free and was becoming more desperate. By early 1990, the FBI, DEA, and Florida authorities continued to pursue suspected drug lord and murderer Jeff Matthews. Since 1988, he had been implicated in 4 executions in the Fort Myers Beach area. For Lee County homicide detective Tom Continos and dozens of agents, a lack of hard evidence and verifiable witness statements kept Jeff Matthews just out of reach.
2 years have gone by and I still couldn't get my hands around Jeff Matthews. There was nothing there for me to follow up on. It was dead end after dead end after dead end. All the time I knew Jeff was my #1 suspect, and he was getting stronger and stronger and bolder on his criminal activities on the beach, and it was very frustrating.
On February 12, 1990, a judge agreed that investigators had enough circumstantial evidence against Matthews to search the dealer's pizza place, the likely headquarters for his operation. They served the warrant after hours to avoid endangering customers.
Upstairs, down here.
From the restaurant, investigators seized documents, phone records, and bank and credit card statements. They also confiscated Matthews' Trans Am. The tire treads were compared to impressions found at one of the murder scenes. The results were negative. Upstairs from the pizza parlor, investigators searched an apartment where Matthews was rumored to sometimes stay with his girlfriend. The couple was not there, nor did the searchers find any cocaine. But they did recover silver-tipped .357 cartridges.
45 caliber cartridges. 22 calibers.
Cash, additional phone records, and most importantly, .22 caliber bullets.
Let's check out
The same caliber used in at least 3 of the 4 executions. They were sent to the crime lab to be compared with the spent .22 caliber rounds retrieved from the victims. Tests of the bullets' metallurgic composition did not reveal any matches. It was one more dead end in a grueling case. Though there was no direct evidence linking the alleged drug dealer to the murders, DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam and his team believed they had enough to indict Jeff Matthews and several associates as part of a continuing criminal enterprise.
We had concerns at that point that by leaving him out on the street, he could commit additional murders. So we felt we had sufficient evidence at that point, and that's the reason why we went and got the indictments to go pick him up.
But Matthews was nowhere to be found. Friends and associates claimed that he had left Fort Myers for parts unknown. His girlfriend, also named in the indictment, agreed to cooperate with investigators to help locate the fugitive. Through a tapped phone line, she made contact with Matthews on his cell.
Hello?
Hey, it's me.
Hey,
The suspected murderer refused to say where he was.
don't worry about where I am.
It's kind of hard to get in touch with somebody.
She told him she was worried about the indictments.
If I find out who ratted on this, I'm gonna kill him.
Matthews vowed that he would find out who was talking to authorities and kill them, plain and simple.
Where are you?
Yeah.
He hung up seconds later. The next day, a confidential informant gave Lee County homicide detectives a promising tip. They learned that Matthews had rented a car with a borrowed credit card on the night Stephen Franken was murdered.
Here's a picture. Can you tell us a little bit about the case?
An evidence technician compared the tire treads from the rental car to a plaster cast of the tracks collected at the scene of the ambush. They matched. It was the first hard evidence linking Matthews to one of the 4 murders. Unfortunately, it didn't prove that Matthews had driven the rental car to the crime scene, nor that he had pulled the trigger.
We were trying to gather as much information about Matthews as we could. We weren't even successful in finding out where this guy lived. We heard he lived in this big house. We heard he lived in that big house. He drove this car. He drove that car. But he was never there. We were never able to pin him down to where he lived. We only knew that he drove one car, and that's a black Trans Am. He was like, he was everywhere but nowhere.
Then on the night of March 16, 1990, Lee County detectives responded to a call from the home of a Fort Myers Beach fire inspector. A pipe bomb was thrown into his driveway. Filled with .38 caliber bullets, the explosion sent ammunition and shrapnel ripping through the inspector's car and house. It also damaged a storage shed and a neighboring home. No one was injured. The inspector said he had no idea who might be responsible. Detectives asked him for a list of businesses that had failed any recent fire inspections.
You got any problems with anybody?
One name stood out.
Jeff Matthews.
I responded to that scene, learned that this fire inspector conducted a fire inspection of Matthews's restaurant and did not give him a very good write-up as far as the fire conditions of the restaurant. Once I heard that, I said, this is Jeff sending this guy a message.
But if it was Matthews, he had left no trace. All police had to go on was the spotty testimony of a neighbor. The neighbor had heard tires squeal just before the explosion. When he looked outside, he saw a white hatchback race away. It had been too dark to see the license plate. If Matthews had been involved, Detective Continos pondered his change in tactics.
I remember thinking that was a significant change in Jeff's operation. Before, he was targeting other drug dealers. Now he's targeting government officials, being that he was a Fort Myers Beach fire inspector. That is something different that Jeff was doing.
The detective returned home well after midnight. He tried to unwind, hoping to get some sleep. At about 2 a.m., the sound of an explosion sent him rushing to the window.
That sounded like a transformer blowing up, a car backfiring, fireworks. I mean, there's a number of things that happen in my neighborhood that sound could possibly occur. Phone rings 2 or 3 minutes later. It's one of my associates who's on the DEA task force, says, Tom, the DEA building just got blown up.
The Fort Myers DEA office was moments away from the detective's house.
I'm the first one on the scene, and I saw the entire DEA building engulfed in flames that are hundreds of feet high. I mean, it was an incredible sight for me.
Investigators immediately suspected fugitive Jeff Matthews. It was the first bombing of a DEA office in U.S. history. 30 firefighters battled the blaze for almost an hour. Dozens of agents, U.S. Marshals, and deputies from 6 neighboring counties were also called into help. FBI Special Agent Guy Notley was among them.
When I arrived on the morning of the bombing, on March 17th, DEA agents informed me that the suspect in this matter was most likely an individual that they indicted 2 days before, Jeffrey Matthews.
If this was the work of Jeff Matthews, the cocaine dealer's violence had escalated to horrific proportions. When law enforcement becomes the target, no one is safe. And Matthews was still on the run. On March 17, 1990, 2 days after a federal grand jury indicted suspected drug lord and murderer Jeff Matthews, the DEA office in Fort Myers Beach, Florida was firebombed. Agents suspected Matthews was responsible, but he was still at large. The FBI and Lee County Detective Tom Continos believed the fugitive was also the prime suspect in another bombing that occurred just hours earlier.
We realized that in all likelihood, that the pipe bomb at the fire inspector's house was a diversionary tactic to pull law enforcement resources away from the patrolling area of the DEA building in order for Matthews to firebomb the DEA office.
By dawn, all that remained of the building was a burned-out shell. Investigators now began the task of assessing what was left, how it happened, and where the evidence was buried, hoping to identify the perpetrator. FBI Special Agent Guy Notley called in specialists from headquarters.
We brought in bomb technicians from our laboratory in Washington, D.C., as well as some FBI agents from the Tampa division to conduct an investigation. The investigation consisted of going through all the debris that was left at the site, basically by taking it through a shovel and sifting through till we found out what incendiary device that's used.
They determined that the fire was caused by a pipe bomb taped to 2 5-gallon gas cans and tossed through a window. It landed in the office of DEA agent Dennis Bolam. He believed the aim was no coincidence.
My feeling is Jeffrey Matthews was trying to destroy the evidence in the case, and I had the case files on the Jeffrey Matthews case in a file cabinet right near the window, and amazingly the fire and the explosion went right past it, and everything was intact as far as tape recordings and notes and so forth.
Because of the early hour, no one was injured, but damage was estimated at $4 million. Through scattered witness accounts, investigators pieced together a possible scenario for the bombing. No one knew how many people were involved. But neighbors heard only one car and one door open, then close. Investigators figured those responsible stopped close to the building for a quick hit and run. The bombing had a profound effect on area law enforcement. Agents struggled to deal with the physical reality of the destruction and their emotional reactions.
I was shocked, and then I was angry, and then I was more determined to get him at that point than anything. It's changed my life because I had to have 24-hour guard on my house, as well as the other agents and the prosecutor in the case. I had a wife and 2 small children that I had to worry about, and they had to be protected. And I knew that he was still running around out there, and that there's a possibility that he could do this again.
FBI lab examiners inspected the remnants of the bomb. Nails used as shrapnel were packed into a metal pipe 5 inches in diameter with a unique threading and surrounded with gunpowder. Duct tape held the pipe between 2 5-gallon tanks of gasoline that helped to spread the fire when the bomb went off.
Pretty much familiar with the murders.
100 DEA agents joined the team, and the 4-person FBI office grew to more than 50.
This is,
Investigators began tracking down where the bomb materials may have been purchased. Teams of agents canvassed every hardware store and gas station for miles around. The pipe used in the bomb had a unique threading. Agents found the store clerk who had sold this unusual item just days before the explosion. The clerk identified Matthews as the customer who had purchased it. Agents asked dozens of gas station employees if they remembered anyone purchasing gas in 2 5-gallon tanks during the past week or so. One remembered that a man fitting Matthews' description had done so recently. The evidence was mounting against the bomber, but agents still had no idea where he was. They interviewed his friends and associates to determine with whom he'd been in contact.
You know Jeffrey, don't you? And how do you know Jeffrey?
One told them that he had written to her, begging her not to believe what she read about him in the newspapers. But she had believed the articles and agreed to have her phone monitored so agents might trace a call from
Well, that would
Matthews.
be great. You'd be willing to do that? Think you could help us?
He was elusive. We never knew where he would be at any given time. He was always on the move. So we utilized a trap and trace. We knew that he utilized a cell phone, and we were trying to zero in exactly where he was.
With a signed affidavit, agents went to the company that handled Matthews' wireless account. If there was a hit on a cell tower from his phone, authorities would be alerted. They discovered he was still in Florida.
We had even aerial surveillance set up in the Orlando area where we found out where his cell phone was coming from to see if when he made a call that we could get people there quickly in an attempt to apprehend him.
But agents were unable to trace Matthews' calls closer than a 2-mile radius. Then investigators received the tip they were hoping for. They raced to a Fort Myers storage facility where the manager had recognized Matthews from the media. The fugitive was presently unloading a truck there. Agents hoped they could get there before the suspected murderer and bomber escaped again. In the spring of 1990, FBI agents raced to arrest 26-year-old fugitive Jeff Matthews, suspected in 4 murders and the bombing of the Fort Myers, Florida DEA building. A team of agents responded to a call from a storage facility manager who had seen the wanted man on his property.
Run around! Face the opposite direction. Keep your hands up.
Agents approached the suspect, ready to use deadly force. They removed his wallet to check his ID. The man was not Jeff Matthews. After 2 years of pursuit, Lee County, Florida Detective Tom Continos was disappointed, but not discouraged.
I just knew that at some point we were going to get him. He was too active, he was too violent. What concerned me was at what cost before we got him. We just didn't know how long it was going to take and how many dead people it was going to take for us to get there. That was my concern.
Is this where he kept his stuff?
Yes, sir, it is.
All right, thank you.
Investigators received a tip from a realtor who claimed to have rented a house to Jeff Matthews before he was a known fugitive. They found common items, including duct tape and hardware store bags that might be linked to the bombing. Then they came across something that seemed clearly connected to Matthews' crimes. As DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam recalls,
there was a note, and the note was addressed to the Lee County Sheriff's Department. I don't know the exact verbiage that was used in it, but it's something to the effect that, "Catch me if you can."
Catching me because you won't.
investigators sharpened their resolve to find him before anyone else was killed.
Jeffrey.
On April 9th, 1990, Matthews called his friend's tapped phone.
Please
Agents were prepared to strike if the woman could keep him on the line.
All right, yeah, I can.
This time he was calling from a payphone, according to FBI Special Agent Guy Notley.
Okay.
We were able to
No
determine
problem.
that he was in the Orlando area. Agents were sent to different quadrants where they could be within 10 or 15 minutes of different payphones that we thought maybe Matthews was using.
Field agents waited for the word as precious seconds ticked by. The woman asked him where he was,
We're about.
but Matthews was anxious to hang up.
Uh-huh.
Despite his best efforts, they got the trace. Agents set out to apprehend him before he vanished again.
Our people were able to put a location on where the phone call was coming from. Agents were only about 5 or 10, 15 minutes away. They arrived at the scene. He was still talking when the agents arrived.
FBI, you're under arrest. Show us your hands. Show us your hands.
After almost 3 years of pursuit, investigators arrested Jeff Matthews without incident. To avoid the death penalty, Jeff Matthews pled guilty to supervising a continuing criminal enterprise, committing homicide to further that enterprise, cocaine trafficking, and bombing a federal building. On July 31st, 1990, Matthews asked to speak to DEA and FBI agents. He said they needed to move on something right away or more innocent people would surely be killed. The convicted killer had a storage unit in Gainesville, Florida, loaded with explosives in a booby-trapped van. Agents immediately notified the bomb squad.
I had concerns that he may be trying to set us up. Maybe have his last hurrah before he went away to jail, and that we might be sending some agents into a real dangerous situation.
As Matthews had described, agents found a red van parked inside a storage unit rigged to explode. A bomb squad defused the devices and secured the area. With the booby trap rendered harmless, investigators quickly removed the dozen pipe bombs they found in the van. They also recovered an AR-15, a MAC-10, a MAC-11, and a .22 caliber handgun with a silencer.
There was rubber masks, Halloween masks. There was police raid jackets. There was additional bombs, bomb-making equipment, manuals on how to make bombs, how to make booby traps, fuses and equipment to make bombs, including pieces of piping and timers and so forth.
To tell you guys,
Matthews also told investigators where they could find the body of the contractor murdered in his pizza parlor more than 2 years earlier, though Matthews claimed that his hitman had done the actual killing.
kept him in a freezer.
Matthews said he and the hitman had carried the body in a freezer to the house Jeff was renting and buried the victim nearby. It was the same house where investigators had found Matthews' taunting note. They located both the freezer and the body, just where the killer said they would be. For this crime, Matthews pled guilty as an accessory.
Drug dealers just don't start off a business by killing people. And most of them don't kill people. But Jeff was a very violent, organized person. And that made him dangerous. And that made him even harder to catch.
On October 1st, 1990, 26-year-old Jeff Matthews was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never again be free to terrorize the people of Fort Myers Beach, Florida.
So you got what I need?
On the streets of New Orleans,
All right.
drug money bought the city's cops.
Good.
Officers became the strong arm of drug lords, brutalizing anyone who dared speak out.
Kim! Help!
With police tainted by greed, undercover agents would have to put their lives on the line to bring down the corrupt officers who hid behind a shattered shield.
In a city awash in narcotics, the drug lords have all the power, even over the police. Corruption in New Orleans grew like cancer, eating away at public safety and threatening to destroy the city. Lured by easy wealth, crooked cops began breaking the laws they were sworn to uphold. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When it became clear that the police could no longer police themselves, the FBI had to get involved. It was a case where the line between friends and enemies became dangerously blurred.
New Orleans, 1993. Tourists packed the city looking for a good time, not all of it legal. Cocaine was in demand, and the dealers cashed in. It was a violent business. For protection, the drug lords turned to those whose duty was to serve and protect. The cops. Officers lined their pockets while enforcing the will of the dealers. They controlled turf like thugs, terrorizing innocent civilians. Agent Stan Haddon of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit in New Orleans was aware of the growing problem.
Our intelligence told us that there was a great variety of corruption taking place among many different officers on the department. However, the one thing that seemed to be the most pervasive was that officers were out there working with drug dealers on the street, were protecting drug dealers on the street, and were stealing money and drugs from drug dealers on the street.
One such drug dealer was Terry Adams, known on the streets as Scaboo. He was a small-time operator who was being extorted by Officer Sammy Williams.
So you got what I need? Come on now, give me what I need.
But this time, the protection money Scaboo paid Williams wasn't enough. On Christmas Eve, the officer demanded that Scaboo pay him $10,000 cash by 6 p.m. If Scaboo failed to show, Williams threatened to beat him and guaranteed him 20 years to life. That evening, at 5 p.m., Special Agent Stan Haddon was finishing up some last-minute work. About to go home, he took one last call. It was Scaboo. His time was running out. He told Haddon that he was being blackmailed, but didn't have the $10,000 the corrupt cop was demanding in less than an hour.
What are the name of the officers?
When Scaboo contacted me, we realized that that was our best chance to do something about police corruption. And I immediately arranged to meet him and debrief him in person. There was no way we could get everything together by 6 o'clock. By the time I met with him, it was 30 minutes before the deadline.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about that.
Haddon and his partner quickly hashed out a plan.
This is, I think, the best one we've got.
Scaboo would meet the officer as arranged, but he'd be wearing an FBI wire. The agents couldn't arrange $10,000 on such short notice. Scaboo would have to convince the cop to accept smaller payments over several meetings.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, they could be rough. Well, you know that. You worked with them.
Yeah, I have.
Assured by Haddon that he would be under constant surveillance, Scaboo took his position. Officer Sammy Williams was still on duty when he arrived with a prisoner cuffed in the back seat of his cruiser. Williams drove Scaboo to a deserted spot behind a seafood market. He ordered him to throw the $10,000 into the trunk. Scaboo told Williams he only had $3,000 now, but would pay the rest later. If the cop arrested Scaboo, he'd never get his payoff. Agents hoped Williams would agree to meet him again for more of the money. He did, and the FBI had it all on tape. Haddon believed this one incident could lay the groundwork for exposing more corruption in the New Orleans Police Department.
Our main objective was to try and create a strategy that would enable us to prosecute as many bad officers as we possibly could.
In the days that followed, agents, along with prosecutors from the United States Attorney's Office, began to plan their operation, codenamed Shattered Shield. Assistant U.S. Attorney Al Winters would advise agents every step of the way on what would be needed to convict the dirty cops.
We were involved really from day one. We met with the case agents on numerous occasions and discussed exactly what we were interested in being developed as far as evidence in the case.
As with most corruption cases, the FBI's strongest evidence would likely come from wiretaps. According to Special Agent Karen Jenkins, an FBI wiretap specialist, securing them isn't easy.
Title III is a court-authorized intercept or wiretap. It's very difficult to get one approved. It's a lengthy process, very time-consuming. Basically, we have to have approval by FBI officials to get one, and beyond that, we have to have the review and approval by Department of Justice officials. Finally, a federal judge will make the final determination as to whether or not one is authorized.
After delivering 2 more payoffs to Officer Williams, Scaboo had won his trust. Now the FBI seized the opportunity to take the operation to the next phase. Scaboo would approach Williams with a proposition. The volume of drug business was going to increase, and Scaboo would need more cops to protect it. If Williams was interested in higher payoffs, he would need to hire more dirty cops to handle the expansion. Williams took the bait. Scaboo met with him for another recorded payoff in mid-January 1994.
Don't forget now.
But this time, Williams showed up with another officer. He turned out to be Len Davis, Sammy Williams' partner.
Don't forget now, man.
It wasn't surprising. Davis was known in the projects as a gangster with a badge.
It's not very good. See if you can make it.
Reviewing the tapes, Haddon discovered a problem.
What are we listening to?
Both Davis and Williams used the coded language of the drug trade. To make charges stick, the FBI had to record the officers using language that a jury would understand. Haddon pressed Scaboo to get Williams and Davis to use words like dope so there'd be no doubt at trial. But when Scaboo told the cops the dope is in, Davis suspected something was up.
If you're in the police business and somebody starts using words that are that overt and that plane, that immediately makes you suspicious that this person is trying to set you up.
Davis shoved Scaboo into the car and told Williams to drive. The agents would be too conspicuous on the deserted streets. If they pursued the cops now, they would put Scaboo's life at greater risk. The only thing they could do was sit patiently and listen to the wire. When the car came to a stop, Davis's rage ignited. He yelled that Scaboo was never to say the word dope again.
They immediately took him to a deserted location, aggressively searched him. You can hear the Velcro ripping loose on his clothes and stuff, and that was a very tense moment.
Davis insisted that he wouldn't go to jail for careless talk. He and Williams stripped Scaboo looking for a wire. Scaboo was sure he was going to die. Miraculously, they never found him.
He's clean. He's clean. He's clean. I'm not going to jail behind you.
Their trust was restored.
You understand me?
Scaboo continued his protection deal with Davis and Williams. For the next job, the cops drove him to a store where a drop-off was to take place. Inside, Scaboo checked a bag at the counter. He passed the ticket to an agent posing as a buyer, who then retrieved the bag. Williams and Davis watched as each transaction went down. They were promised $1,000 for every kilo of cocaine they protected. For them, the deals meant easy money. Davis and Williams met Scaboo behind stores and alleyways for the protection payoffs. The FBI recorded every word. Gradually, Operation Shattered Shield was building a solid case against police corruption. The recordings continued into the spring of 1994. Once agents were sure Davis and Williams were solidly on board, the FBI prepared to expand the investigation. With still more cocaine to guard, Williams and Davis would need to recruit more dirty cops. Federal agents hoped to snare every one of them. But agents knew the officers may become suspicious of Scaboo's rapidly growing drug business. They needed to bring in a big-time dealer, someone whose status as a kingpin would explain the larger shipments.
You like some? Sure. Okay.
Hadden called on Juan
We're
Jackson,
doing down here is,
an FBI agent trained
bringing in
specifically for
JJ
working
here
undercover.
to represent a drug kingpin from up in the East Coast.
At that time, I was in New York City, and I'd been contacted to come down to just be interviewed and go over the actual case. A lot of times they'll be looking for a certain person, height, weight, color, or whatever, to infiltrate or get into a certain group.
Known as JJ, the agent would act as Scaboo's cocaine supplier, proposing to use New Orleans as a hub to store and distribute his product nationwide.
I was a high-level drug dealer. I played that role, and I had ties where my operation was in both Miami and in New York City.
With the arrival of JJ, Shattered Shield was about to grow from a minor drug business to a booming enterprise. Jackson was one of the FBI's best undercover agents. He was smart and experienced. But his life would be in the hands of the informant, Scaboo, who had no training. Jackson needed to build complete trust with Scaboo, or they'd both be dead.
The informant, because he lives that world, is probably for me anyway, the most important, because he himself has been there. He's been around these people. If he's not believable, it's not going to work. And I think that was the big thing for me down there, was to make sure that we were going to be believable.
Jackson and Scaboo rehearsed their roles again and again, preparing for the real test with Davis and Williams. Jackson, federal agent from the north, and Scaboo, a southerner who had dealt drugs all his life, had to forge a common history. Their story would be that they had met in the Army. After their stint was up, they'd kept in touch. They hashed and rehashed details of their friendship, habits, fake memories that they'd have to know cold, and when to say them. They were dealing with criminals who could run thorough background checks and who were free to use deadly force.
We knew that whatever we had to keep it simple, but we had to make sure that we remembered certain things. The biggest thing I thought that helped us was my initials, my nickname. So no matter how many times they would ask him, what's his name? He believably said, because he only knew, JJ.
In April, the FBI was ready to introduce JJ into the operation. He arrived at a hotel carrying what was supposed to be a drug payment of $100,000. For the first time, Williams and Davis caught a glimpse of the big-time dealer. Their perceptions would be critical.
The first encounter was in the Sheraton Hotel. They were going to stand at a distance and just observe. It was another test to see if they were willing to do what they were going to do. Hey, I don't know how it's going to work. They could arrest me right now and take me off and, I'm down, because it was supposed to be drug money. So it was a test.
Scaboo told the cops about JJ and his plan to use New Orleans as a transport hub for his cocaine business. Davis and Williams carefully studied JJ's every move. Jackson was creating his character before their eyes. It would become his full-time identity, and it would have to hold up under scrutiny. Everything depended on what the cops thought they had seen, and if they believed the cash exchange was genuine. The plan worked. The cops were convinced that JJ was the real deal. The FBI was now poised to take Operation Shattered Shield to the next level. By the spring of 1994, the FBI's Operation Shattered Shield, targeting New Orleans police officers involved in the city's drug trade, was in place. Posing as a drug kingpin named JJ, undercover special agent Juan Jackson worked with Scaboo, the drug dealer turned FBI informant. Scaboo rented a hotel room for JJ to meet officers Len Davis and Sammy Williams for the first time.
What's up, man? What's up?
That was showtime. That was a big deal. On any first meeting with any bad guys, a million things are going through your mind. I mean, are you going to be believable? Is anything going to happen that's going to change their attitude? It's either going to work from here or we're all going to go home.
Playing the street-savvy drug dealer, JJ insisted that everyone strip to establish trust. For this first meeting, Jackson didn't wear a wire. He didn't need to. The room had been thoroughly wired by the FBI for audio and video recording. Then, in a bold gamble, JJ invited them to search the room. Because they were cops, Davis and Williams knew how to find a room wire. But JJ bet his life on the FBI's technicians. The cops never found the wires. JJ was beginning to build trust with the officers. But officers are trained to sniff out deception.
I mean, you got to think that I'm meeting with two police officers. Because of the guns, you also always have to remember the threat. You always have to be conscious of the threat and remember exactly where they are and what they're going to do and where the weapons are.
With the cops convinced for the moment, JJ began to discuss the proposal approved by case agent Stan Haddon.
And he played the role of a big-time drug dealer from New York who was using New Orleans as a transshipment point, simply as a storage point where he could bring dope in, leave it for a while, have it guarded and protected by the officers, and then thereafter have it shipped out to other points unknown.
For their role, JJ promised to pay them $5,000 every day the cops guarded the warehouse. Williams and Davis were enthusiastic about the plan, even offering advice. The cops urged JJ to hire young drivers, give them company uniforms with name tags, and put signs on the sides of the trucks to resemble legitimate companies. For the FBI, the meeting was flawless.
The meeting went off without a hitch. They bought JJ's act. They believed him completely, and they also said the magic word cocaine, which got it clearly established on tape that we were talking about the officers protecting a drug operation.
From that May meeting, the plan moved quickly. The FBI found a warehouse that met their needs, far from public view and rival drug dealers. JJ and Scaboo met Davis and Williams for a walkthrough.
JJ and Scaboo would meet with Lynn Davis and Sammy Williams at the warehouse for what we call the pre-deal meet. There at that meeting, they would discuss when the dope was coming in, how long it was going to stay in town, and how much money JJ was going to pay for the officers to guard the dope.
Once inside, Davis told JJ that he had half a dozen more officers lined up to guard the cocaine shipments. They would work in 10-hour shifts. Uniformed police outside guarding payloads of cocaine inside. Up to $250,000 worth in each load. At that June meeting came the first big payments from JJ. More than $10,000. Everything is going smoothly. But one aspect of the warehouse plan bothered Assistant U.S. Attorney Al Winters.
Basically, what we told the agents, unless we had evidence, irrefutable evidence, that these people knew they were guarding cocaine, we couldn't prosecute it.
Because the cops stood guard outside the warehouse, they could later claim they didn't know that drugs were inside.
I think having some sort of video or photographic
Haddon had to
reference
find a way to prove Davis's recruits saw the drug shipments.
Or maybe even see.
His team mulled over ways to bring the drugs into plain view.
We need them to implicate themselves. Here, I'll take those.
The officers would have to be recorded seeing and discussing the shipment. Shipments were delivered to the warehouse one weekend every month according to schedule. Then, in mid-July, the FBI sent a shipment that the guards didn't expect. With one load already in the warehouse, an FBI agent dressed as a courier brought another shipment. The driver shocked the guard cops by unloading the cocaine in plain sight. This was too overt for Len Davis's crew. They didn't want to see drugs at all.
They didn't want the vehicles outside the warehouse unloading drugs and stuff where the officers could actually see it.
Quickly, get down here.
The cops called Sammy Williams on a cell phone JJ had given him. Williams called JJ, and JJ and Scaboo raced to the warehouse. JJ responded like a hot-headed drug dealer.
I was arguing with this guy. I mean, we were actually screaming at each other. What are you doing? Where are you? Whatever. And he's observing this. There's a police officer calling Lynn, telling him all what's going on and how this doesn't look good.
To the cops, this whole drug operation was starting to look dangerously unprofessional. Concerned, the driver made another call. Sammy Williams arrived to straighten out the problem.
Oh, stop. Okay. See what I got to deal with? Leave it. I got it. See what I got to deal with? 5 minutes. Got it.
JJ explained it was the driver's screw. He asked that the cops escort the van to the city limits right away. Despite the risk, the episode worked. It showed that the cops knew what was inside the warehouse.
This ain't right. What's going
Take
on?
him to the edge of town, all right?
And it was all
Edge of town,
videotaped.
Just let him go. Just let him go.
But the episode raised doubts for the cops. Either JJ was an amateur, or he was part of a sting. Either way, they'd be watching him more closely now. Shattered Shield wore on into the summer as all of New Orleans baked.
About 100 degrees out here.
In August, guarding the warehouse proved hard duty. The cops complained of the wear and tear on their engines from running the air conditioning all day in the heat. They wanted a vehicle that was more comfortable, that could also endure the long hours, perhaps a van. The officers asked Len Davis to provide one, and Davis brought their request to JJ. For the investigation, it was a huge break. The sweaty cops had just handed the FBI a golden opportunity.
It was a stroke of luck. One day, Lynn approached me and said that the officers were complaining that they're running their cars in air conditioning, and the cars are starting to overheat. They're burning gas. On and on and on. Once we were able to rent the van and put the listening device inside, we were able to hear a lot more conversations.
The FBI quickly filed the paperwork to get court-authorized wiretaps for the van. Technicians carefully installed state-of-the-art microphones. They had to yield top sound quality for months with no maintenance. The van was a perfect Trojan horse for getting inside information.
I picked this out myself.
The shiny new van made the officers suspicious. They wondered if anyone could have tampered with it.
It ain't nothing wrong with it.
They wanted to know exactly where Davis had gotten the vehicle.
I've never seen this vehicle before.
Because JJ had so completely won Davis's trust, Davis told the cops that he himself had rented the van.
Is it all right?
He vouched for it.
It's okay.
That calmed their fears.
I picked it out myself. What do you think?
Len Davis didn't want anyone upsetting his flow of payments. The FBI would soon learn just how ruthlessly Davis guarded his interests. After 3 months of Shattered Shield, more and more New Orleans cops came under the FBI's investigation. Len Davis and undercover agent JJ met often to discuss drug shipments and payoffs for police protection. Davis made frequent threats.
They'll tell you, we run this city. We do whatever we want to do. They let me know that very many times. If they feel like they want to shut it down, they'll shut it down.
But Davis liked the money. JJ knew that as long as the money flowed, he would never shut the operation down. Davis called the shots for the other officers. He recruited and set the schedules using his cell phone. But he complained about his bill. So JJ offered Davis a new cell phone, free of charge. It was one more way the FBI could record the cops' knowing involvement in drug trafficking. The wires the FBI had planted in the warehouse van were paying off. One night, 2 guards on the graveyard shift brought prostitutes to the van. The wires picked up everything, even the cops' sexual indiscretions. When Jenkins heard this, she immediately phoned JJ. The situation was a chance to catch the cops off balance. JJ called Davis to complain and to see what they'd get on tape. He told Davis he had checked out the warehouse and found that the cops weren't protecting it. JJ wasn't paying cops to have sex. He ordered Davis to straighten things out. Davis arrived in a fury. His henchmen were threatening to ruin his whole operation.
Lynn was upset. Lynn was a businessman through and through. Lynn wanted it to work exactly one way. And he was really upset that I was upset. And he got up. He got up. He came out there and just kicked everybody out.
JJ's call brought Davis down on him hard that night. But the episode triggered deep suspicions among the dirty cops. They now felt sure that JJ was the problem and believed they could run the operation better themselves. They discussed ways to kill JJ. Their plans alarmed Agent Karen Jenkins.
When I heard those conversations where they were threatening to do harm to our undercover agent, it sent a chill down my spine. It scared me. Before I came to New Orleans, I had worked with JJ in another office, so I knew him personally, and I was very concerned.
Despite the threats to his life, JJ was resolute, keeping the cops engaged with plans to further expand the operation. He promised Davis that the largest shipment would arrive before Christmas. After that, he would move the deliveries to another part of the city.
So that's what the fuck I'm talking about. You with that?
All the time, JJ had to draw out more evidence on tape without making Davis suspicious.
He was very careful. He watched everything. He paid attention to everything I said. There were conversations where we'd talk, and I'd use the word cocaine. He would count the times I used it. And he would tell me, Jay, you said cocaine 5 times. Jay, you said kilos 5 times. So I had to be careful.
At the same time, Haddon and his team had to defuse another plot they overheard. The cops were threatening to kill the couriers and steal the cocaine. The agents scrambled delivery times and mapped new routes to and from the warehouse to keep the cops off balance. With so many dirty cops, the FBI couldn't make a clean sweep from the outside alone. Agents would need someone powerful in the police force to be a strong ally. Despite the danger of leaks, they decided to seek help from within the New Orleans Police Department. October 1994 brought fresh changes to New Orleans in a new police chief, Richard Pennington.
So, how do you like our first?
Pennington was an outsider from Washington, D.C., hired in the hopes of reforming the Crescent City's crooked police force.
Since you're just moving in, actually, why don't you have a seat?
The FBI invited the new chief for a meeting.
News is not all good, fortunately.
Then Haddon introduced JJ. He informed Pennington that Operation Shattered Shield was uncovering corruption deep in the force that he was about to head. His cooperation would be critical for the success of Operation Shattered Shield. On the streets of New Orleans, Davis and Williams were still on active duty, cruising their territory. Len Davis had a long list of public complaints against him. During their rounds one night that October, Davis and Sammy Williams patrolled the Desire housing project. Seeing the pair of cops approach, 2 youths took flight. Williams chased one teenager down, bludgeoned him, and left him bleeding in the street. At that moment, Kim Groves, the victim's aunt, decided that police had terrorized their neighborhood long enough.
Who's gonna pay the bill?
The next day, Groves, a 32-year-old mother of 3, filed a complaint against Len Davis and his partner. She cited the pair for police violence. An officer alerted Davis about the complaint.
Do you want to know his name? Officer Davis, do you know him?
Yeah, this is definitely
Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike McMahon saw the report.
She reported not only Sammy Williams, who did the actual brutality, but Len Davis as well, who had nothing to do with that pistol whipping. And at that point, Len Davis became enraged.
For Davis, Groves' complaint came at the worst possible time. It would bring unwanted attention just as the new police chief was coming on board.
I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get her.
Len Davis vowed to get revenge. The same day that Kim Groves filed her complaint, Richard Pennington was sworn in as New Orleans' new chief of police. That marked the start of Shattered Shield's final phase, the shift from an FBI effort to a partnership with a city desperate to clean house. That very night, Agent Jenkins recorded several conversations that would show just how rotten some of the city's men in blue had become. The first call was cryptic. Hours after Pennington was sworn in, Len Davis made a call on his cell phone. He gave an order to an unknown man.
I need you to do a 30 for me.
The FBI taped the conversation, but because Davis spoke in modified police code, agents didn't know what it meant. While they attempted to decipher it, agents recorded a second, more disturbing call. This time, the unknown man called Davis. As they spoke, a police dispatcher announced a murder in the Desire housing project. The victim's name, Kim Groves. When Davis heard the news, he cried, "Rockabye." It was the triumphant cry of a killer. When he later heard it, the call shocked Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike McMahon.
As soon as he confirmed the name of Kim Groves, Davis shut off the radio, and then on the wiretap conversation over the cell phone just exulted in a primal scream of delight that indeed Kim Groves was dead.
When agents reviewed the tapes and checked the phone records, they discovered that the man who spoke to Davis was Paul Hardy. Davis had asked Hardy for a 30, a police code normally used to report a homicide. But that night, Davis used it as an order for the murder of Kim Groves. Canvassing the projects, agents quickly learned that Hardy was a known drug dealer who led a small gang of thugs. With the help of two accomplices, Hardy acted quickly, coldly, and for just $300. As he sped away over a bridge, Hardy threw the barrel of the gun into the canal and handed the body of the gun to an accomplice for safekeeping.
What's up, man?
When the FBI realized Davis's role in the murder, agents grew more concerned for JJ's safety. JJ met with Davis soon afterward. He looked carefully for signs that Davis was anxious or upset.
Yeah, what's up,
He saw
man?
none. The murder of Kim Groves seemed to have relaxed Davis.
Yeah. Look, let me call you back later,
JJ
alright?
still had to play his part, the role of a drug lord. Though uneasy, he was careful not to talk about the murder.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
I wanted to ask a lot of questions about it. I couldn't. The only thing I'd ask him was, is there anything different happening since the last time I was here? He said no. And we went on just like nothing ever happened. Is he a cold-blooded killer? That could probably do you in a minute? Yeah.
Having seen what Davis and his cops could do, JJ had every reason to believe that he could be next. He was unaware that they were already planning ways to kill him. Days after Len Davis ordered the murder of Kim Groves, the FBI learned of more threats by Davis's men. A New Orleans police officer assisting in Operation Shattered Shield received an anonymous threat. It came with Kim Groves' obituary. The message was clear. Death would come to those who talked.
We're in trouble.
That day, Stan Haddon learned of still more threats against JJ and the other agents. Agent Jenkins had recorded 5 cops at the warehouse plotting to kill the couriers and JJ.
Oh, yeah.
Then they would steal the cocaine and sell it themselves. Haddon had no choice. The FBI had to wrap up the operation before it was too late.
Once we realized that the lives of our undercover agents were at serious risk, then we had to react to it. We had to do something.
The FBI needed to move up their plans for the big shipment JJ had promised to Davis. A cocaine shipment so large that it would require a half dozen more cops to guard it. But Haddon needed a location unfamiliar to the cops, a place where the FBI could mobilize quickly. He and his team scouted the Mardi Gras truck stop on Elysian Fields Avenue. The spot had good highway access. It also posed little risk to the public in the event of a shootout. The cocaine would arrive on an 18-wheeler, then be loaded into cars and escorted by the cops out of the city. Every detail had to be mapped out. The plan would require the coordination of 85 agents positioned strategically along the routes. When Davis put out the word about a huge November 18th shipment, he enticed new recruits. As a load of cocaine worth $250,000 arrived, Davis, Williams, and their crew stood ready as protection. Agents posing as drivers moved the shipment. From the command center, Haddon and Jenkins kept watch of the whole operation. There were hundreds of ways the truck stop scenario could go wrong. With the undercover agents' lives on the line, there was no margin for error. The cocaine was divided in 2 loads. Williams escorted one. Davis followed the other. They shepherded the couriers to the edge of town, shielding them from other drug gangs and from the law.
To make it easier for our surveillance, we had one of the courier cars go to the east and one go to the west because we had 2 complete surveillance teams operating simultaneously, and we didn't want the 2 to get crossed up with each other.
The operation went off without a hitch. 6 additional cops were videotaped in the act of drug trafficking. The FBI was about to enter the last phase of Shattered Shield, arresting the corrupt cops who would kill anyone who opposed them. After the big truck stop operation, FBI agents moved quickly on the murder of Kim Groves. They searched the house of the hitman Paul Hardy. There, agents found an unauthorized copy of a guide to police codes, the same codes that Davis used when he ordered Groves murdered. Another search at the home of one of Hardy's accomplices turned up the murder weapon, a 9mm handgun. The 2 investigations, Shattered Shield and the murder, were closing at the same time. For the ringleaders, the FBI took no chances. Agents came to Len Davis's house the next day when he was off duty.
Look, I ain't done nothing. What are you talking about? Look, I'm a police officer, man.
The thug with a badge was arrested on federal drug charges and for the murder of Kim Groves. For Davis's partner Sammy Williams, agents would use a different approach. Haddon wanted to flip Williams to the prosecution side.
At that point,
it worked.
And they decided, okay, let's throw another curveball and then let's bring Juan in. So they brought me into the door and I introduced myself, especially to Juan Jackson, the FBI. You could see the color leave his face. His world just came crashing down.
Sammy Williams turned government witness. His testimony would later prove crucial for getting convictions. Haddon and his team had no time to lose. Before news of Davis and Williams' arrests could spread, they had to deliver the rest of the gang to justice. Dozens of armed men in uniform.
The strategy we were to employ was to arrest Len Davis on December the 5th. And then on December the 6th, we had all of these officers appear before a federal grand jury. And then on December 7th, the grand jury ordered all these officers to come to the FBI office to give handwriting exemplars.
Len Davis's recruits arrived at the FBI's office to give handwriting samples for analysis together with 60 fellow officers. Since the drug ring involved no written records, and so many officers provided writing samples, the crooked cops suspected nothing. Like the others before it, the FBI's ruse worked. One by one, more than a dozen dirty cops of New Orleans were arrested.
That was a safe way to do it because obviously all of these officers were armed and they were facing very serious charges, and that was a way to do it to avoid any potential for any bloodshed or any unwanted resistance by the officers.
In court, the FBI's recordings built a solid case against the officers. The videos and audio tapes spoke louder than the code words and erased all doubts that jurors might have had. Agent Karen Jenkins knew the evidence was strong.
The jury was able to hear for themselves what the officers said. They were able to see for themselves what they were doing because of the videos that we had.
That wasn't me. It could have been anybody.
As prosecutor Al Winters had predicted early in the investigation, Davis tried to talk his way out of it.
All police officers know what that is. It's a homicide.
Even after all the safeguards we took, Davis's defense at the trial was that he was conducting his own undercover operation, that it was not really done according to the book, but, you know, he was a poor cop and didn't have a lot of training, but he was trying to conduct his own undercover operation.
Davis never admitted any wrongdoing. He didn't need to. The audio and videotape spoke for themselves. Faced with the prospect of convicting those sworn to protect them, the citizens of the jury listened intently.
The tapes were chilling, and as those tapes were played, the courtroom was as silent as a cathedral.
Has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor, we have.
Will the defendant please stand?
The jury deliberated just 15 minutes.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree and hereby sentence the defendant.
Len Davis was sentenced to death for his role in Kim Grove's murder, which was later commuted to life. In two other trials, Davis and his co-conspirators received 18 convictions for drug trafficking. 15 officers were headed for prison. Because he cooperated with prosecutors, Sammy Williams was sentenced to just 5 years. He would never again wear a badge.
Add that you have irrevocably stained that uniform you once wore. But I must reluctantly recognize that other crimes can only be solved with cooperation of people like you. Court dismissed.
For the Big Easy, Haddon's case brought a long, hard look in the mirror.
You know, I think that the city of New Orleans has been very tolerant of all sorts of conduct which might be considered improper in other parts of the country. It's part of the culture here, and I'm a Louisiana native. But I think this was a wake-up call to the citizens of New Orleans that there was a serious problem within the NOPD, and that problem had to be addressed.
You know, you take an oath, and I think that when you do that, there's no excuse for anything else. I think we helped. I think that now their focus is different. I think hiring, I think pay scale, I think everything about what the New Orleans Police Department is about is different.
Under Chief Pennington, the New Orleans Police Department revamped its practices and fired more rogue cops. The Big Easy had cleaned house. The department and the FBI continue to work together to bring justice to the city's streets. Philadelphia, Mississippi, 1964. A sleepy southern town steeped in tradition finds itself targeted for invasion. Across the South, a legacy of racial hatred is about to be challenged, but not without a fight. Before it would end, 3 civil rights workers would vanish, drawing the eyes of the world to the quiet community with a burning secret. Amen!
In the summer of 1964, Mississippi stood at the crossroads of history. It didn't want to be there. It had no choice. For the black population, the sultry air held the fragrant promise of civil rights. For much of the white population, it was to be a summer of heated intolerance. Violence rumbled throughout the South, but it touched down in Philadelphia, Mississippi. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. The disappearance of 3 civil rights workers drew the attention of the nation to the small southern town. Named for the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia was not living up to its namesake. For in it, brotherhood was divided by race, and the city was ruled by men hiding behind hooded sheets. To solve the mystery of the missing workers, the FBI had to infiltrate and expose the Klan's invisible empire.
Mississippi, circa 1960. The people here were like folks anywhere else, proud of their towns, steadfast in their beliefs, and resistant to change. But change was in the wind, and that wind was blowing relentlessly upon them from the north. In the summer of 1964, 1,000 students from northern universities prepared to go to Mississippi to teach Southern blacks about their voting rights as full citizens of this country. President Johnson was to sign the Civil Rights Bill in July. In a naive sense, it was to be the beginning of the end of black oppression. But generations of hatred cannot be diminished by simple legislation. The student action was spearheaded by COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations. It was an umbrella group that united an alphabet soup of organizations intent on winning civil rights for blacks. The mission was called the Summer Project. According to Joe Sullivan, an FBI agent at the time, that's not how the locals referred to it.
It was labeled very quickly by the Mississippians as the summer invasion of Mississippi, which was forthcoming, and they were looking forward to it rather unhappily. So that was the genesis of the problem.
As the invasion grew nearer, citizens steeled themselves against it. By day, life went on as it always had, and people whispered of the unpleasantness to come. But when the night fell, words turned to action, and the Ku Klux Klan, the invisible empire, began to stir. It wouldn't stay invisible for long. Civil rights workers training in Ohio knew their efforts would be countered by violence and terror, but they had no idea how far it would go or how fast it would escalate. For COFO, Mississippi, with its long history of segregation and rabid racial hatred, was the hardest target for change and the biggest prize. Bob Moses was one of the Summer Project organizers.
Mississippi is targeted in every black person's mind as the symbol of racism. And so as we mount our campaign down there, the question is in our minds, well, you can do all you want. You can pass a civil rights bill if you want to, and you can do this and that, but unless you have actual change in Mississippi, it's not going to really get rid of this infection, because Mississippi is the place where they brew it.
6 months before the students were expected in Mississippi, 24-year-old Michael Schwerner moved from New York to Meridian, Mississippi to establish a base of operations. Schwerner had approached Mount Zion Methodist Church in the nearby black community of Longwood for permission to use their space for COFO meetings.
And we have got to stop it now, nip it in the bud. That's what we've got to do.
But it's dangerous. It's dangerous.
The residents of Longwood, who had peacefully coexisted with their white neighbors, found themselves at a crossroads. The church board had to weigh the benefits to the cause of civil rights against concern for their own personal safety. When the meeting was adjourned, they hadn't come to an accord. But the Klan made the decision for them. Several church members, including women, were badly beaten. Later that night, Mount Zion Church was burned to the ground. Though the fire was never investigated by local authorities, the FBI opened a file on the incident.
FBI, ma'am.
They were keeping a record of possible federal law violations which fell under their domain. They knew that once the students arrived, the summer promised to be long and hot.
Just wondering if I could
The FBI called the file Mississippi Burning, or My Burn. They conducted their own investigation, asking church members what they saw that night.
How did they know that? How did you know that?
Though the Klan members had obscured their faces, witnesses recalled seeing a man in a truck wearing a sheriff's hat, suggesting that local law enforcement was involved. It wasn't surprising. Many in the South resented the federal government's intrusive push for integration. Local law enforcement often worked to maintain the racial status quo.
The mood is defiance of the federal government, so you're going to defy any attempt by the federal government to change this. They're viewed as the enemy, right? So it's not just that black people are the enemy, the federal government is also the enemy.
Jim Ingram, now the commissioner of the Mississippi Department of Public Safety, was an FBI agent in Jackson in the 60s. Back then, it was a thankless job.
But we travel the state. We might be in Natchez, we might be in Philadelphia, we might be in Hattiesburg, working violent crimes committed against citizens of Mississippi. Therefore, we were away from our homes, and we would receive threats. Snakes were placed in mailboxes. There was always that threat, you better lock your car. You never knew what you might find in your automobile when you return. And also you had threats against your person and family.
But despite all attempts at intimidation, the FBI's presence in the state was about to increase more than 100-fold. While setting up their COFO Operations Center in Meridian, Mississippi, Michael Schwerner and his wife Rita were joined by a 20-year-old plasterer named James Cheney.
Good to have you aboard. This is my wife, Rita.
Hi. How are you? Good to have you.
Fine.
Cheney, a Meridian native, knew the culture and political climate of the area.
Sit down right here. Okay, dear.
24-year-old Michael Schwerner, a liberal from the Bronx, had an Ivy League degree in social work. His background couldn't have been more different from Cheney's, but the men were united in their goals. Schwerner's friends called him Mickey, a name he seldom heard outside the office.
Townspeople, and I'm talking now about the Klansmen in Meridian, called him Goatee. He wore a goatee, and they called him the Devil.
Hi, may I speak to Bob Moses?
Schwerner and Cheney were later joined by Andrew Goodman, 20, a volunteer from Queens, New York, who had finished his training in Ohio just 1 week earlier.
Yeah, Andrew, just put in that box right there. We'll be just leaving in a second.
While Rita Schwerner returned to New York, the 3 men and other volunteer staff prepared for the first group of 200 civil rights workers from up north. The first wave of the invasion, scheduled to arrive on June 21st, 1964. That morning, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman drove from their base in Meridian to Longwood, 35 miles away, to talk to the Mount Zion church members about the fire 5 days before. Cheney, who knew the area, would drive. As the vanguard in the march to freedom, the men knew that trouble likely lay ahead. Their ground rules were unambiguous. Stick to the main roads, cooperate with authorities, and never travel at night. They planned to be back that afternoon. Schwerner told his staff to call the COFO office in Jackson if he didn't phone in by 4 p.m. He never made the call. When Mickey Schwerner failed to phone his office at the scheduled time, the FBI was notified. They in turn contacted local authorities to see if anyone had seen Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman.
What? What are you doing, Terrence? You're not counting like that.
Someone had.
Out of the car!
According to Neshoba County Deputy Cecil Price, the trio was returning from Longwood that afternoon when he pulled them over outside of Philadelphia, Mississippi, 38 miles from Meridian. They were brought to the county jail in Philadelphia.
Another one.
Cheney was booked on a speeding charge.
I need to make a phone call.
The others were held in connection with the burning of Mount Zion Church.
What do you know about that? Nothing, sir.
Cheney was locked in a cell designated for black prisoners. Schwerner and Goodman shared a different cell.
All you have to do is make sure that you're polite. Say yes sir, no sir.
They weren't allowed to make a phone call until dinner time, hours after their 4 o'clock call-in time had passed. According to another person sharing the cell, when the jailer's wife told Schwerner he could make a collect call, he declined. No one knows why. Eventually, after Schwerner paid Cheney's $20 bond, Deputy Price released the men. By then, it was 10:30 p.m.
I don't want to come back to Philadelphia again.
What happened next was anyone's guess.
As long as they were missing, you had some hope. If they had turned up in jail and they were still in jail, then you had some hope. The issue was the release at a certain time of night from the jail, and then they're missing again. So that circumstance means the worst.
Agent Sullivan, too, feared the worst. He suspected that the civil rights workers weren't simply released, but more likely handed over to the Klan.
This was a type of crime that I was familiar with. The lockup and then give away the prisoners instead of releasing them. I was familiar with this sort of thing. I was quite sure that this was what was in progress.
The disappearance was chilling news to the student volunteers scheduled to arrive in Mississippi the next day. But people throughout the state had a different read on it.
The Mississippi response was, this is a hoax, and these people have really staged this to get national attention, and, they're up hiding someplace in New York or some other place, right? and this is just all a big publicity stunt. That was the official Mississippi response.
There were widespread rumors, and we were told, I think it appeared in the papers too, that these people had set up a scam here and then vanished to Cuba, where they would leave the state of Mississippi embarrassed by what had happened to them.
The investigation began with Deputy Price, the last person to have seen Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. He stuck with his story of releasing them around 10:30 p.m., but he couldn't account for his own whereabouts for about an hour afterward. For Joe Sullivan, dispatched from Memphis to lead the investigation, it was the only clue, and not much of one.
All I know is they got in their car and they headed out of town, just like we told them to.
The sheriff's office was a participant. That I was sure. I didn't have any proof. All I had was a history of having seen this sort of thing before.
Well, we pulled them over
and
we brought them in here.
At that point, I became more selective about who we were telling, what we were doing.
The FBI began a search for any signs of the young men. No one had seen them, or at least they weren't saying so. Then, on June 23rd, 2 days after their disappearance, their station wagon was found. 2 Choctaw Indians from a nearby reservation had come across the smoldering vehicle the following evening. It had been burned to the metal in a swampy area called Bogachita Creek, 50 feet from the highway near Philadelphia. When they learned of its possible significance, they called the FBI. Special Agent Jay Cochran was dispatched from Washington. An expert in firearms and explosives, he'd seen more than his share of civil rights violence. When he arrived at the scene, he wasn't optimistic about what the car would reveal.
In examining the burned out vehicle, we were looking for any evidence of human remains. We were also looking then for any evidence that may have been left behind of any value in determining what happened to the civil rights workers.
The car was too far gone to provide any clues. But nearby, investigators found something more promising. A watch later identified as belonging to Schwerner, and keys to the car. The watch had stopped at 12:45. It took no time at all for the news of the discovery to spread.
The vehicle hadn't been recovered very long before the news was out on the police wires and the press wires and the neighbors' wires and the radio and so on. And we started to run a stadium at Bogachita, and that wasn't easy.
For those so inclined, the discovery of the car only supported the idea of a hoax. But unofficially, investigators' hopes of finding the men alive had faded.
It was obvious from the beginning that we weren't leaving until the bodies were located. Mr. Hoover wouldn't have countenanced that, and for that matter, neither would the general public. We were going to find those bodies if it took forever.
Agent Sullivan contacted Director J. Edgar Hoover to ask for reinforcements.
I told him that I thought I would need at least 25 men in short order, but I thought I would need more pretty promptly if it developed the way I was afraid it would. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to need 100 men." And he said, "There are 100 men coming."
And they're real good guys, all right?
Soon, 100 agents, aided by student volunteers, descended on Philadelphia to search for Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman.
You guys come with me and start checking the bushes over here.
It wasn't enough. The men or their bodies could have been anywhere. Against the backdrop of this agonizing mystery, student volunteers stormed the bastions of the Old South, trying to register black voters. Dixie fought back with all it had. As the summer invasion pressed forward, the eyes of the world focused on Mississippi. In Neshoba County, Deputy Price and Sheriff Lawrence Rainey rebuffed the press. They felt the disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers didn't merit the attention it was receiving. And still the search continued. "400 sailors from Meridian Naval Air Station were pressed into duty, working in rotating shifts. Woods were scoured, rivers were dragged. Then the FBI received word that a body of a black man had been pulled from the Mississippi River near Vicksburg. They went to investigate. Though Vicksburg was 140 miles away, it was possible that Cheney's body may have floated downriver. It was the only lead in an otherwise dismal search.
We discovered that that this body was not that of one of the missing civil rights workers. It was determined that he was the victim of a Klan lynching.
It wouldn't be the only false alarm that summer as other lynching victims surfaced. Some had gone unreported, because in some areas, the Klan was the law. Finding the missing civil rights workers was the FBI's first priority, but busting the Klan was the ultimate goal. As the drive for voter registration continued, the hot Mississippi air crackled with hatred. Klan activity intensified. More than 60 black homes, churches, and businesses burned that summer, and that was just the beginning.
I saw the violence, I saw the killing, I saw the people left homeless by fires, I saw churches burned in the middle of the night, I saw lives being lost for no reason whatsoever, by a group that felt they were right.
To break the Klan's hold on the South, President Johnson authorized a new FBI office opened in Jackson, Mississippi, 3 weeks after the men disappeared. According to Agent Ingram, the days of subtlety were done. The FBI was taking off its gloves.
In a matter of a few months, you had almost 300 agents working up and down. From this state runs about 400 miles from the coast up to the border of Tennessee, so we covered every facet of it. 82 counties, we had agents all over the place.
While some agents continued to beat the bushes, others knocked on doors, hoping to find some leads. People were polite, but uncooperative.
White boys and a black boy. Have you seen anybody?
The FBI's tactic was to divide and conquer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Agents would attend Klan rallies, take photographs, copy down license plates, until they were asked to leave. By then, they had what they had come for.
Then, the next time we talked with them, they say, I'm not a member of Klan. Well, you were at this Klan meeting. Why were you there? If you're not a member, you're a sympathizer. Do you know these people blew up a church? Do you know these people blew up a school that was trying to desegregate? Is this the way you want to operate? And most would say no. So we found that being at some of the meetings was a deterrent for some. Some would stop coming because they didn't want us to visit them.
Others required more persuasion. Agents were assigned individual Klan members to watch over from a distance. If a bombing or other act of violence occurred, it was the agent's duty to call that Klansman to account for his whereabouts.
Before long, you know, they did not like being summoned out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning when a crime was committed 4 counties away, but after a while the wives said, hey, I don't want this anymore. My kids do not want it. And so before long you could talk with them and they understood where you were coming from. You got to know each other on a first name basis.
Soon informants started coming forward. Some were housewives with stories to tell. Others were Klan members haunted by conscience who could provide some small piece of information away from the curious eyes of their neighbors. To provide additional incentive, civil rights and religious organizations came up with money to pay informants. The veil of silence began to lift. Some informants hinted that the investigation should begin at the sheriff's office, though Sullivan had already had his eye on Sheriff Rainey and Deputy Price.
Deputy Sheriff Price was a key target in our thinking, as was Rainey, because Price didn't do very much without Rainey's authority. Our problem was to document what he had done, to find somebody who would tell us about it.
An informant suggested talking with a young man named Wilmer Fay Jones. Agents located 19-year-old Jones living in Chicago. He had suddenly moved out of Philadelphia almost 3 weeks before the men disappeared. It wasn't by choice.
I was told in town that this is the place.
He told agents that his troubles began on June 1st when he went to a store in Philadelphia to get his class ring resized.
You guys could fit that for me.
The woman behind the counter was reluctant, but took his ring to fix. Soon after, he was arrested by Sheriff Rainey and Deputy Price. They locked him up for supposedly asking the shop clerk out on a date. He wasn't allowed a phone call. When they finally released him just after midnight, a gang of men were waiting for him. They roughed him up and forced him into a truck.
Get in the car! Get in the car! Get in! Get in!
The vigilantes drove him to a secluded spot. They tried to force him into confessing that he had asked the clerk out.
You better tell us, boy!
He swore his innocence. The gang was prepared to kill him on the spot. But then one of the men, who they called the preacher, spared his life. He told Jones to leave town for good or he was a dead man.
You understand me? You understand me? Get out of here. Go.
Jones was on the next bus out of town.
They roughed me up a little and they let me go.
The story Jones told sounded like a plausible M.O. for what could have happened to Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. Only perhaps they weren't lucky enough to have escaped with their lives.
But here now, we have some additional evidence about what happens to people who are in unlawful custody in jailhouses and are going to be disposed of in one way or another. So if it had happened once in Neshoba County, we were sure it could have happened again.
Believing that Jones may hold the key to the location of the civil rights workers' bodies, agents had him take them to the spot where the gang roughed him up. A search of the area turned up nothing. But there was one informant that Sullivan was keeping to himself, slowly cultivating, winning his confidence by degrees.
Sure, your identity will never be revealed.
This informant spoke under terms of total anonymity. His identity is protected even to this day because his life may still be in danger. He's known only as Mr. X. If anyone still considered the disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers to be a hoax, their opinion would soon change.
They'll kill me if they ever found out.
The FBI's star informant was about to emerge. On July 31st, 1964, Mr. X agreed to talk to Agent Sullivan.
After we finished our social chat, I said, "Are you going to be able to tell me anything significant tonight?" And he said, "I think I can tell you where the bodies are buried." And I said, "Tell me where."
Mr. X told Agent Sullivan that Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were buried in an earthen dam at a place called Old Jolly Farm, owned by the wealthiest man in the county, Olin Burridge. But agents couldn't go there at once. They knew their moves were being scrutinized by the Klan. They didn't want to make it obvious they'd been tipped off to the burial location. A search warrant was issued for Old Jolly Farm. Sullivan sent Agent Cochran and others to the dam site. When they arrived, they realized this was no job for probing rods and shovels. The earthen mound still under construction was 550 feet long, 20 feet high, and 10 feet across at the top. If the bodies were here, they weren't merely dropped into graves. Rather, the dam was built on top of them. Agents wanted to keep the excavation a secret. That would be difficult now. They needed an outside contractor with bulldozers and other heavy earth-moving equipment to extricate the bodies. According to Special Agent Jay Cochran, there were some concerns about the safety of the crew.
It was decided to utilize armed agents in a convoy of these heavy equipment from Jackson to the location where we would begin using the equipment.
On August 4th, the equipment was in place. The contractor was asked to advise them how best to clear away the earth layer by layer.
Cochran talked to him and said, "Can you give me an estimate as to what the construction cycle was on this dam? How it was built, how the dig was done, how the dam mound was shaped, and in what time sequence?"
He said, "Well, you must know what you're looking for," and I just didn't comment to him. At no time during these negotiations had either the construction crew or in this case the foreman been told precisely what we were looking for, but I think they would have had to have been blithering idiots, and they weren't, to have not known what we were after.
After the foreman gave agents a crash course in dam building, Cochran poked a stick in the ground where he wanted the digging to begin. Then, in a move that has become a legend in the annals of the FBI, he had a change of heart.
Cochran then picked up a stick, and for reasons best known to his guardian angel, he walked 15 feet further and put the stick in the ground and said, "Dig here." And that's where they were.
The job, beginning at 8:30 in the morning, progressed slowly. By 2:45, the pit was 13 feet deep, and the pungent smell of death was unmistakable. The machines were moved aside in favor of more delicate garden trowels. As the sun beat down, the odor rose up and poisoned the air. Flies swarmed, ushering in the agent's grim success. Just after 3 p.m. at 14 feet, the first body was found. It was Mickey Schwerner, identified by the contents of his wallet. Goodman was uncovered next, followed by Cheney.
It's very hard to describe. It's perhaps the saddest experience that one can have. It's a graphic illustration of man's inhumanity to man, you know, that simply kill these people for no earthly reason, no earthly good reason.
The bodies had been buried more than a month, so it was impossible to immediately determine the cause of death. The coroner was summoned, and with him came Deputy Cecil Price.
I just walked up like it was the sheriff's business. Found a body, how about that? It was pretty casual, really.
Price and the coroner lifted the bodies from the pit so they could be moved to the state hospital in Jackson for autopsy.
Cecil Price helped to load all of them. I didn't help to load any of them. I was letting the local authorities who had jurisdiction over the murders do their thing. So we couldn't be accused of confusing or messing up the evidence or anything of that sort.
If the deputy's presence was an example of the criminal returning to the scene of the crime, Agent Cochran saw no sign of guilt.
Every agent that was at the scene, eyes were fixed on Price when he was there. And I noticed not the slightest emotional reaction. And I don't think anybody else did either.
The bodies were autopsied in Jackson. All three men had been shot. Schwerner and Goodman were each shot once, Cheney 3 times. A hard, rock-like substance was pried from Goodman's right hand. Whatever happened that night, the substance showed that Goodman's nightmare didn't end with a bullet.
Upon subsequent examination of that substance at the FBI laboratory, it was determined to be clay similar in makeup or consistent with the clay composition of the soil at the dam site. This would tend to suggest that at the time Mr. Goodman was laid in his grave, he was still alive.
The bullets from the victims were analyzed at the FBI's Firearms Toolmarks Unit. Most of the more than 5,000 weapons here were confiscated over the years from actual crimes. Though its equipment has changed since 1964, the role of the unit remains the same: to match bullets to weapons. Today, the shooting gallery is the domain of Supervisory Special Agent Paul Tangren.
The bullet will pass over defects within the barrel, and those are defects that are specific and unique to that firearm. And that pattern of marks it picks up passing over these defects is like a fingerprint for that gun.
Bullets from a crime are scrutinized side by side. If they were shot from the same gun, the comparison microscope would form a seamless image of the marks on both bullets. Bullets shot from different weapons simply wouldn't match up.
I've got lots of marks and very little agreement, and that is typical of what you would see of 2 bullets fired from 2 different guns of the same type.
Using similar techniques, the FBI determined that Cheney was shot with 2 different .38 caliber weapons. Residue showed that the men were shot at close range. Total cost of the bullets used to kill 3 men, about 25 cents. Suddenly, to the people of Neshoba County, the missing civil rights activists was no longer a hoax or publicity stunt. This was the turning point. Racists drew the line at murdering white people. According to Agent Jim Ingram, the FBI no longer seemed like the bad guy.
Then they realized we're dealing with some very violent people. So the mood changed to our betterment. because we had people that wanted to assist us. Particularly the little town of Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was amazing how many people then said, look, if we have these people among us that would kill, then we need those individuals found and arrested and prosecuted.
I do want to help you.
Meridian Police Sergeant Wallace Miller was one respected Klan member who had seen enough. He wanted out of the Klan, but the FBI convinced him to stay. Now, the FBI had their mold, and the impenetrable walls of the invisible empire had been breached.
And the colors must be driven out of our hearts, and we have to look to the cross. Let it be done. Amen. The next few weeks.
Sergeant Miller proved that he wasn't involved in the murder of the civil rights workers. He helped the FBI by gleaning information about the crime from fellow Klansmen. Others were also coming forward. Nobody knew that anyone else was talking. The information started to flow. From interviews with various informants, the FBI compiled a list of names of Klansmen who may have been involved. The same names kept coming up. Agents learned that the murders were the plan of Sam Bowers, the first Imperial Wizard, or head of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan of Mississippi. His right-hand man was Edgar Killen, known as the Preacher, because he was one. He was also apparently the same preacher that spared the life of Wilmer Fay Jones.
So we had informants that could give us direct information. We had individuals who actually were involved in the shooting that gave us signed confessions.
Confession led to confession. Slowly, a picture of the events that night took shape.
Going down in Louisiana.
Sir, I need to make a phone call.
It was a plan of horrible simplicity. While Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney were in jail, Deputy Price notified Preacher Killen, who rounded up fellow Klansmen. The Klansmen gassed up their cars, loaded their weapons, and waited until the men were released so they could carry out their Imperial Wizard's orders. When the civil rights workers were released at 10:30, the Klan was ready.
Let's head back to Meridian. How'd they treat you? Okay, but I didn't like it there. Yeah, spooks. Hey, you got the keys? You just drive. I don't want to come back to Philadelphia again. Let's get out of here.
Not far out of Philadelphia, they must have noticed lights in their rearview mirror, closing at a fast clip. They sped up to try to outrun them, topping 100 miles per hour. One pursuer's car broke down, but two persisted. Deputy Price's cruiser was one of them. He hit the flashers. Cheney pulled over.
With you, boy.
Deputy Price yanked Cheney from the station wagon.
Out of the car. You shut up, boy. You were doing over 100 miles an hour in my county, boy. Don't make me chase you like that. You see them lights?
Schwerner and Goodman were escorted into the back of the patrol car.
Get out of there. Whoa!
As Cheney started to follow them, Price clubbed him with his blackjack and shoved him into his car.
Get off, boy.
The procession continued down Highway 19, one of the Klansmen driving the station wagon. The murders occurred without fanfare. Schwerner was the first to die. The car stopped on a dirt road. Schwerner was pulled out of the car, spun around, and shot point blank. Goodman was shot in much the same manner. They saved Cheney for last, shot by 2 men. The bodies were loaded into their station wagon. They were driven to Old Jolly Farm, where the bulldozer operator waited in the darkness, ready to conceal the evidence under 14 feet of clay. Last, the station wagon was driven to the swamp. Gas was poured over it. A match was struck. On November 25th, the FBI announced it knew who killed the civil rights workers. But murder charges fall under state jurisdiction, not federal. The best the FBI could hope to do was to convict on civil rights violations. They knew that Mississippi would be unlikely to file murder charges. More than 5 months after the murders, 19 men were charged with felony conspiracy to oppress and intimidate the civil rights workers from practicing their constitutional rights. 2 more were charged with having knowledge of the crime. All made bail and were released. A pretrial hearing was set for December 10th.
When you realize the scope of the physical evidence that we were able to capture, the pictures of the dam, the pictures of the bodies, the postmortems, the burned vehicle, on and on, we just had enormous amounts of physical evidence, circumstantial evidence to document the confessions. So it was a powerful case that we turned over, and we were blessed because we had 2 outstanding prosecutors.
The evidence was, we thought, insurmountable, but we also knew that there were troubled times in Mississippi, that not everyone thought like we did.
The federal government's prosecution went wrong almost from the start. At the hearing, the judge refused to allow signed confessions or written testimony from key witnesses. The government pressed the matter, and on January 11th, a grand jury indicted 18 men, including Sheriff Rainey and Deputy Price. But the charges were knocked down from felony to misdemeanor. The case languished until 1966, when the United States Supreme Court ruled that the felony charges were applicable. Three years after the murders, on October 9th, 1967, the trial was held at the federal courthouse in Meridian. For 10 days, the nation awaited the verdict. But none came. The jury was deadlocked.
And immediately, the people there within the courtroom in Meridian, Mississippi, they burst into laughter and joyful hugging each other, saying, "Hey, we've won. It's a hung jury." Well, the judge said, "No, you're going to go back."
And back they went to deliberate further. That next morning, October 20th, 1967, they reached a verdict. Of the 18 men charged, 8 were ultimately found guilty of civil rights violations, including Imperial Wizard Sam Bowers and Deputy Cecil Price. It took more than 3 years for justice to be served, and even then, it was delivered only in half measures. Bowers received the stiffest sentence, just 10 years. Cecil Price received 6. Sheriff Rainey and the preacher were acquitted. none of the men indicted was ever tried by the state for murder. Many of them still live in Mississippi, and though there's talk of reopening the Myburn files, all evidence in the case was destroyed years ago by court order. The hatred that split the nation was not so easily eradicated. According to civil rights activist Bob Moses, what happened in Mississippi marked the beginning of the great changes to come.
What has changed in Mississippi is that before the 60s, Mississippi held itself as a state apart from the rest of the country, a place which was going to defy the country at any odds to maintain what was its racial apartheid. And now it's indistinguishable from the rest of the country. So Mississippi has become like every other state in the country.
Donations helped to rebuild Mount Zion Church. It has become a shrine to the three men who came here hoping to make a difference, and who succeeded in ways they could never have anticipated. Nicky Schwerner and Andrew Goodman were buried in New York. James Chaney's grave is in the hills outside of Meridian, where it bears the scars of vandals.